Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard. Today I turn the camera over to you, the Hollywood Graveyard community, as we travel the world to visit famous and historical graves in your neck of the woods. In this video, we're back in New York to find legends like Louise Brooks, Helen Hayes, Natasha Richardson, John Coltrane, and many more. My friends, the time is yours. Our global grave hunting adventure filmed by you brings us back today to the US. We ended our last video in Canada, so let's hop over Lake Ontario and Niagara Falls to begin our US leg of this series in New York. Then over the course of the next several videos, we'll make our way across the states and finally land back in Los Angeles, where we'll pick up our regular Hollywood series. We've spent a lot of time here in New York in previous videos, New York having perhaps the greatest concentration of famous graves outside of California. There's a lot of ground to cover today, not just in the boroughs of New York City, but across all of New York State. So let's get rolling. Let's kick off our time here in New York in Rochester and Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, where we're greeted by a small castle. Here we find legendary actress, dancer, and model Louise Brooks. She would become an icon of flapper culture in the 20s and 30s, noted for her distinctive bob haircut, a look she helped popularize in the 20s. Her career began on the Broadway stage in revues like George White's Scandals and the Ziegfeld Follies. By 1925, she began appearing in films, a career which continued into the sound era of the 30s. Notable among these are The Canary Murder Case in 1929. She found some of her greatest success leaving Hollywood behind in the late 20s to star in German films, including Pandora's Box, Diary of a Lost Girl, and Miss Europe. By 1938, she retired from film and fell on hard times and into obscurity. When silent films began to be rediscovered in the 50s, her profile grew once again, being compared to other silent greats like Greta Garbo. Later in life, she would publish a memoir titled Lulu in Hollywood. Louise died from a heart attack at age 78. Nearby, we find another actress, Mary LaRoche. She played Doris in Bye Bye Birdie and Dorothy in Gidget. But much of her work was on television, making guest appearances on shows like M Squad, Mike Hammer, Perry Mason, The Magical World of Disney, and 2 turns on The Twilight Zone, including playing Annabelle in the episode Living Doll. Mary lived to be 78. Her grave is currently unmarked. Next is Riverside Cemetery in Rochester. First up here is Blanche Scott, a pioneering aviatrix. In a world dominated by men, Blanche forged her way through the virgin skies of the early 20th century to become the first female American aviator, before women even had the right to vote. She made her mark being the second female to drive an automobile across the United States, which earned her an invitation to take flying lessons, becoming America's first female pilot, coming to be known as the Tomboy of the Air. Blanche would work as a test pilot as well as a stunt pilot before retiring from professional flying in 1916. Blanche then came to Hollywood to try her hand at scriptwriting for studios like RKO, Universal, and Warner Brothers. She appeared in 2 silent short films about aviation. Blanche died at age 84, and decades later would be inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Charlotte Cemetery in Rochester hosts early settlers of this area, as well as veterans of numerous wars, and a daredevil named Sam Patch. In the early 1800s, Sam was known as the Jersey Jumper, the Daring Yankee, and Yankee Leaper. He earned these monikers through daredevil feats of jumping over falls and bridges and buildings. In 1829, he gained national fame by becoming the first American daredevil to successfully jump from a raised platform into the Niagara River near the base of Niagara Falls and survive. His 1829 jump into the Genesee River from 125 feet would be his last. He never resurfaced, and his frozen body was found in ice in Rochester early next spring. Sam was just 22. Historic Mount Hope Cemetery is also here in Rochester. Quite a few notables in these grounds, like William Warfield. He was a singer and actor, best known for his bass baritone voice and his unmatched rendition of Old Man River in the 1951 musical film Showboat. The role is referenced right here on his grave.
Old Man River, he just keeps rolling
He had a prominent career singing and acting on stage as well in productions of Showboat and Porgy and Bess. William would also lend his strong voice to narration, winning a Grammy for spoken word. He died at age 82 from injuries from a fall. Next up here is a showman named Johnny Baker. He was the foster son of Buffalo Bill Cody, and working and studying with Buffalo Bill from the age of 7, was destined to become a showman. He was a sharpshooter in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, and later worked as a manager and booker for the show. After Buffalo Bill's death in 1917, he founded the Buffalo Bill Memorial Museum. Johnny lived to be 62. One of the grandest monuments here belongs to Malcolm Glazer. The name Glazer is likely familiar to you if you're a sports fan. Malcolm was a businessman and professional sports team owner. He grew the family business into First Allied Corporation, a holding company for various business interests. He entered the sports world when he purchased the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a staggering $192 million. Under his ownership, the Buccaneers franchise earned 7 playoff berths, 5 playoff wins, and in 2002, captured its first Super Bowl championship. In the early 2000s, Glazer took over Manchester United, one of the most popular soccer clubs in the world. He would use his wealth for philanthropic and charitable causes, including a children's museum. Malcolm Glazer died at age 85. More stories from the business world bring us to the grave of a man named John Jacob Bausch. He was born in Germany but immigrated to the United States in 1850, where he would set up a specialist optician shop in Rochester. There he sold imported spectacles, telescopes, microscopes, and opera glasses. Years later, he would partner up with Henry Lomb, specializing in offering durable spectacle frames of vulcanized rubber. By the 1880s, Bausch & Lomb, as the business was called, became Rochester's biggest industry. Bausch & Lomb remains an industry leader in vision and eye care products. Bausch lived to be 95. Looking for the Lomb in Bausch & Lomb? Look no further than a few spaces away. Here lies Henry Lomb. Lomb loaned the struggling Bausch capital to help the business grow, and he was eventually brought in as a partner, helping to grow the company into what it is today. Henry Lomb was also a co-founder of the Rochester Institute of Technology. He lived to be 79. And how about the namesake of the city of Rochester? He's here too. Meet Nathaniel Rochester. He was a veteran of the Revolutionary War before becoming a successful merchant. He invested in land in this area, where he would later settle. The town would be named for him, Rochesterville, later incorporated as the city of Rochester. Nathaniel Rochester would be the first county clerk and first representative to the New York State Assembly. He continued to help the town grow, developing the economy and helping to found churches and banks. Rochester lived to be 79. Outside of Rochester in Penfield is Oakwood Cemetery, where rests Pete Duel. He was an actor best remembered for his role as Hannibal Hayes in 33 episodes of the 70s series Alias Smith & Jones. You also saw him as John Cooper on the TV series Gidget and David Willis in Love on a Rooftop. Pete made a few films as well, including The Hell with Heroes. In 1966, Pete was named television's most promising male star. But his career was cut tragically short in 1971 when he took his own life at the age of 31. According to Quentin Tarantino, Pete Duel was one of the inspirations for the Rick Dalton character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Our next New York stop is Union Cemetery in Livonia. Here lies Irving Crane. You may have guessed from the illustration on his stone that Irving was a pool player. Nicknamed the Deacon, Irving Crane ranks among the greatest pool players of all time. He won numerous championships, including 6 World Straight Pool Championships. In 1978, he was inducted into the Billiards Congress of America Hall of Fame. Irving lived to be 88. In nearby Niagara Falls is a woman whose fame is directly associated with the city's namesake. This is Lakewood Cemetery and the grave of Annie Edson Taylor. Earlier we met Sam Patch, who jumped into the river at the base of Niagara Falls, but he didn't actually go over the falls. Annie Edson Taylor was a school teacher who, on her 63rd birthday, became the first person to survive a trip over Niagara Falls in a barrel. a feat which she accomplished on October 24, 1901. She used a custom-made barrel for the trip, made of oak and iron and padded with a mattress. Rescuers reached her barrel shortly after the plunge, and Taylor emerged alive and relatively uninjured. And he died at age 82 and rests here in what is known as the Stunter's Rest section of Oakwood Cemetery. This is Mount Calvary Cemetery in Cheektowaga in the Buffalo area. No trip to Buffalo would be complete without indulging in those famous buffalo wings, which if you enjoy, you can thank Teresa Bellissimo here. As the story goes, one evening in 1964, Teresa was in the kitchen at Frank and Teresa's Anchor Bar and Restaurant, which she owned with her husband. Just before midnight after Lent, Frank asked Teresa to come up with something to feed hungry friends. Mrs. Bellissimo took some chicken wings, deep-fried them, doused them in hot sauce, and served them with a blue cheese dressing and celery. The men at the bar were rapturous over the concoction, and thus buffalo wings were born. Teresa then became known as the Chicken Wing Lady. She lived to be 84. Next up is Applewood Cemetery in Springville. Here lies Judd Strunk. He was a singer, songwriter, and television personality, particularly known for his comedic work. As a musician, his most popular song was Daisy a Day, released in 1973. It would make the Billboard Top 20 for both country and pop music. On television, Judd was a regular performer on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In during the 1972 and 73 seasons. Judd was also a private pilot. On October 5, 1981, he suffered a heart attack just after takeoff of a plane he was flying. The plane flipped and fell some 300 feet, crashing and killing him and his passenger instantly. He was 45. Snow and geese welcome us to Forest Lawn Cemetery in Buffalo. We found some famous folks here in previous videos, like Rick James, but there's always more to discover here, like this monument to Giuseppe Verdi. If you saw our tour of Italy, you'll recall we visited his actual grave there in Milan. This is a cenotaph here in New York. Verdi was one of the giants of the Italian music scene in the 19th century, known particularly for his operas. Among his most famous operas are Aida, Rigoletto, Il Trovatore, and La Traviata. Having dedicated his life to secular music, it came as something of a surprise when Verdi decided to write a requiem mass in 1874. He was inspired to do so after the death of Alessandro Manzoni. If you think Mozart's requiem is badass, check out Verdi's. Verdi's music has been used in countless film and television soundtracks over the years, making his music familiar even to those who never listened to opera. He died in 1901 at the age of 87. Next up here we find a magician known as Fakir of Ava, real name Isaiah Hughes. The 19th century illusionist is a predecessor of many of the great magicians that would follow. He transformed standard European tricks into what he billed as feats from the East, and also invented many of his own magic tricks. Fakir also devised the gift show, a gimmick copied by many subsequent magicians. His apprentice was Harry Keller, who would go on to become the dean of American magicians and mentor subsequent greats like Harry Houdini. So many modern magicians can trace their lineage back to Fakir of Ava. He died in 1891 at age 77. Quite a few US presidents call New York their eternal home. One of them rests here at Forest Lawn, Millard Fillmore. He was the 13th president of the United States, serving from 1850 to 1853. He was vice president to Zachary Taylor and succeeded to the presidency when Taylor died in 1850. Fillmore was instrumental in passing the Compromise of 1850, which led to a brief truce in the battle over the expansion of slavery. To Fillmore, slavery was evil, but felt there was little government could do to end it at the time. His presidency in general is not highly ranked by historians. Fillmore would not receive the nomination for president in 1852. He died after suffering a stroke at age 74. Our next Buffalo stop is Mount Olivet Cemetery, where we find one for you baseball fans. Here lies Joe McCarthy, one of Major League Baseball's great team managers. known for his leadership of the Chicago Cubs and New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox, in a career that spanned the 20s to the 50s. He was the first manager to win pennants with both the National and American Leagues, with the Cubs and Yankees, and won a total of 9 league pennants and 7 World Series championships. Joe would be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1957. He lived to be 90. Maple Grove Cemetery is in Frewsburg. This is the grave of Robert H. Jackson. He was a lawyer and jurist who served as an Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court in the 40s and 50s. During that time, he was noted for his work as Chief United States Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials following World War II. These were the trials in which the Allies held accountable the Nazis for their war crimes. Jackson was also part of the Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education, which determined that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. He died from a heart attack at age 62. Next up is Sequoia Valley Cemetery and the grave of Michael O'Donoghue. He was a writer and performer known for a dark and distinctive style of comedy. He was a founding writer and contributor to the satiric National Lampoon magazine, which launched in 1970. Then in 1975, when Saturday Night Live was created, Lorne Michaels assigned Michael O'Donoghue as one of the original head writers on the show. He appeared in the first ever Saturday Night Live sketch in the very first episode, alongside John Belushi.
Let us begin. Repeat after me. I would like to feed your fingertips
to
the Wolverines.
to the Wolverines.
Michael was just 54 when he died from a cerebral hemorrhage. Recollections of Michael O'Donoghue describe him as an artistic force behind an entire generation of humorists and satirists. Continuing east, we reach Cooperstown, New York, and the graveyard of Christ Church. In these grounds rests James Fenimore Cooper. He was an early 19th century novelist known for writing historical romances and frontier adventure stories. His leather-stocking tales introduced iconic American frontier scout Natty Bumppo. In this series is perhaps his best-known work, The Last of the Mohicans, published in 1826. It would be made into a popular film in 1992 starring Daniel Day-Lewis. He also wrote nautical fiction, accounts of the U.S. Navy, based on his own tour of duty in the Navy. He lived the final years of his life on the property where he grew up here in Cooperstown, a town founded by his father, William Cooper. At the time of his death at age 61, he was one of the most popular authors in the world. Maple Grove New Cemetery is in Hoosick Falls. Meet Grandma Moses. She was a folk artist who started her creative ventures quite late in life, at 78. It's never too late, right? She had been creative much of her life, but the challenges of farm life and family left no time to pursue creative endeavors. But later in life, after the onset of arthritis, her sister suggested she try painting. Grandma Moses would paint scenes of rural life, old-timey landscapes and such. Her art was described as simple, nostalgic, and luminous. She would be prolific in her output in these final decades of her life, and by the 50s rose to national acclaim, including a Time magazine cover feature in 1953. Grandma Moses lived to be 101. You fans of the Beverly Hillbillies will be curious to know that the character Granny Moses, played by Irene Ryan, was named after Grandma Moses here. This scenic view comes to us from St. Peter's Cemetery in Lithgow. In these grounds is a dynasty of acting greatness, beginning with Rachel Kempson. She was an acclaimed British actress of stage, film, and television. She got her start joining the Royal Shakespeare Company in England. During these early years performing on stage, she would meet and marry legendary Shakespearean actor and matinee idol Michael Redgrave, the beginning of an acting dynasty. They appeared many times together, not only on stage, but also in films like The Captive Heart. Other of Rachel's notable films include Out of Africa as Lady Belfield. The couple had 3 children, Vanessa Corn and Lynn Redgrave, all of whom became actors, and she would appear occasionally with them on screen as well. Rachel Lady Redgrave lived to be 93, passing away from a stroke in 2003. Next to Rachel is her daughter, Lynn Redgrave. She too had a long career on stage, film, and television. After her theatrical debut in the 60s, Lynn began appearing in films. She won a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress for the 1966 film Georgie Girl. The role also earned her her first Academy Award nomination. Her second Academy Award nomination would come decades later for her supporting role in 1998's Gods and Monsters, a role which won her the Golden Globe. Television appearances include in shows like Desperate Housewives and Ugly Betty, and her work on stage plays would earn her 3 Tony nominations. The talented actress holds the curious distinction of being the only person nominated for all 4 Big Four American Entertainment Awards, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony, without winning any of them. Lynn Redgrave was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2002 and eventually died from the disease at age 67. Not far from here is Rachel's granddaughter, Lynn's niece, actress Natasha Richardson. Early in her career, she played Mary Shelley in Gothic and the title character in Patty Hearst. Then came roles like Kate in The Handmaid's Tale and Elizabeth in the remake of The Parent Trap.
He's an American, you know.
No kidding. So, was it love at first sight?
I knew you were going to ask me all these questions one day. Taxi!
On stage, she won the Tony for her role as Sally Bowles in the 1998 Broadway revival of Cabaret. But Natasha would die tragically and unexpectedly in 2009 from a head injury sustained on a skiing trip in Canada. She was just 45. Natasha was married to actor Liam Neeson. Wiltwyck Cemetery is in Kingston, New York. This is the grave of Gladys Hurlbut. She was an actress, playwright, and screenwriter. She would appear in some 30 productions in the 50s and 60s, mainly guest spots on TV shows like The Andy Griffith Show, The Donna Reed Show, and I Love Lucy. As a writer, she co-wrote the script for the Joan Crawford Clark Gable vehicle, Love on the Run. Her play Higher and Higher would also be made into a film starring Frank Sinatra. She retired in the 60s and lived to be 89. Next up here at Wiltwyck is a name from Titanic lore. Here lies William Gwynne. He worked for the United States Postal Service until becoming a sea postal clerk, someone who handles mail on passenger ships. In 1912, William found himself aboard the RMS Titanic. Some 6 to 9 million pieces of mail were aboard Titanic. The iceberg would strike the ship right where the mail sorting room was located on the starboard side. The mailroom began taking on water, and postal clerks tried in vain to save any mail they could, bringing bags up to the upper decks out of waist-deep freezing water. William Gwynne never made it out of the ship, his body lost to the wreck. He was 36. This monument is a cenotaph. This is St. Mary's Cemetery in Kingston. If boxing is your thing, maybe you know the name Billy Costello. As an amateur, he won the 1978 Golden Gloves Open Championship in New York. As a professional, he would become the WBC Junior Welterweight Champion in 1984 to 1985. His professional career included an impressive streak of 30 consecutive wins. He ended his career with 40 wins, 23 by knockout, and 2 losses. Billy died from lung cancer at age 55. Woodstock is our next stop, a name synonymous with music. So it will come as no surprise that we find some musicians here in these grounds, like Rick Danko. He was a musician and songwriter playing bass and singing. He's best remembered today as a founding member of a band called The Band, which formed in 1967. The group was notable for backing Bob Dylan before branching out on their own. The band's hits include The Wait, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, and Up on Cripple Creek. The band would perform at the Woodstock Festival in 1969. Their farewell concert in 1976 was filmed as The Last Waltz by Martin Scorsese. Rick Danko died from heart failure at age 55. Following along the outer fence, we find this distinctive musical monument to one of Rick's bandmates, Levon Helm. He was drummer and one of the vocalists for the band, playing with the group in the 60s and 70s. Helm also had success in various solo music ventures, and even had a notable career as an actor. He made his film debut playing Loretta Lynn's father in the 1980 film The Coal Miner's Daughter. He also played Jack in The Right Stuff. In 1994, he would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the band. Levon died from throat cancer at age 71. His epitaph reads, "Music is the language of heaven." Across the street from Woodstock Cemetery is Woodstock Artists Cemetery. Here lies Paula Danziger. She was a children's book author. Her best-known works include The Cat Ate My Jumpsuit and the Amber Brown series. Her Amber Brown is illustrated right here on her tombstone. She published dozens of books for children and teenagers, winning accolades for her work. Paula died from complications of a heart attack at age 59. Nearby is the grave of Milton Glazer. You may have guessed from the uniqueness of this marker that Milton was a graphic designer. Even if you don't know his name, there's a pretty good chance you've seen some of his work. He designed the instantly recognizable I Love New York logo. He also designed a poster for Bob Dylan, a version of the DC Comics logo, and more. He'd be honored with the National Design Lifetime Achievement Award, as well as the National Medal of Arts. Milton died on his 91st birthday from a stroke and renal failure. Speaking of Woodstock, let's head to the site where that infamous music festival was held, because it also happens to be the final resting place of the first artist to perform there, Richie Havens. The folk R&B musician forged his place in music history when he opened the Woodstock Festival on August 15, 1969. The success of this performance led to a rise in fame, releasing the popular albums Stonehenge and Alarm Clock in the coming years, with more than 20 albums released throughout his career. He'd then branch into acting, appearing on stage in productions like The Who's Tommy, and on films in Bob Dylan's Hearts of Fire, and playing Othello in Catch My Soul. He died from a heart attack at age 72, his ashes scattered from the air over this site. Our next Kingston cemetery is Montrepose. This is the grave of Michael Curry, real name Christian Schwank. The supporting character actor appeared in more than 60 film and television productions throughout his career. He had roles in several Clint Eastwood films, including Any Which Way You Can, Sudden Impact, and The Deadpool. Other film appearances include Halloween 3 and Airplane 2. And on television you saw Michael in episodes of Soap and Dark Shadows. Michael lived to be 81. In Upper Middleburg Cemetery is this impressive monument to a man named Timothy Murphy. He was a Revolutionary War Continental soldier, a sharpshooter, and the owner of one of the first double-barreled rifles. As a member of Morgan's Rifle Corps, he fired the shot which killed British General Simon Fraser at the Battle of Saratoga on October 7, 1777. This deprived the English of leadership during this crucial battle, which was a turning point in the Revolution. While stationed at Middlefort on October 17, 1780, Murphy's bravery resulted in repelling the British and their Indian allies, saving local colonists. His exploits were documented in an 1839 biography and the 1953 novel, The Rifleman. This is Nine Partners Cemetery in Millbrook. In these grounds is a legend of rock music, Rick Ocasek. He was a founding member, singer, guitarist, and songwriter for the band The Cars, which formed in 1976. They had a number of hits, including You Might Think,
You might think I'm crazy. All I want is you.
Drive,
Who's gonna drive you home?
and Just What I Needed.
I guess you're just what I need. Just what I needed.
Rick also had a hit as a solo artist with the song Emotion in Motion. During this time, Rick developed a reputation as a producer, taking on up-and-coming bands like Weezer, No Doubt, and more. He would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with The Cars in 2018, just 1 year before his death. Rick's cause of death in 2019 at age 75 was attributed to natural causes. Next up, we find another of the erstwhile presidents who call New York home, this one ranking among the greatest and most consequential of the 20th century. The Franklin D. Roosevelt Historic Site is located in Hyde Park and is the former home and current museum and resting place of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the 32nd President of the United States. Assuming the presidency at the depth of the Great Depression, FDR helped the American people regain faith in themselves. He brought hope as he promised prompt, vigorous action and asserted in his inaugural address that
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
to get the country back on track, he implemented the New Deal, a series of programs, public work projects, and financial reforms and regulations to successfully rescue the U.S. from the Great Depression. Major surviving programs under FDR include the SEC and Social Security. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941,
a date which will live in infamy.
Roosevelt was instrumental in working with the other Allied leaders, Churchill and Stalin, to support the war effort in Europe and the Pacific, and to bring an end to the Axis threat and World War II. During this time, he would also lay the groundwork for the United Nations. Roosevelt would be the longest-serving president, from 1933 until his death in 1945, just before the end of the war. This was before the two-term limit was implemented. He was immensely popular in his time and historically ranks among the 3 greatest presidents in U.S. history. Here too, of course, is his wife, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. She helped redefine the role of the First Lady through her public engagements and advocacy. She advocated for civil rights of African Americans and Asian Americans and women's rights in the workplace in an age when it was still controversial to do so. She would become a delegate on human rights and help pass the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At the time of her death at age 78 from cardiac failure, she was one of the most esteemed women in the world. Our stroll through the cemeteries of New York brings us now to Poughkeepsie Cemetery. This is the grave of Sidney Schanberg. A fearless reporter, Sidney's work as a journalist would earn him accolades, including a Pulitzer Prize. This was for his coverage of the fall of Cambodia in 1975. At the risk of his own life, he remained there after the Americans left as Phnom Penh fell to the communists, in order to document the events. The Oscar-winning 1984 film The Killing Fields is based on his experiences and those of fellow journalist Dith Pran, in which Sidney was portrayed by Sam Waterston. He died from a heart attack at age 82. Also here at Poughkeepsie is a pioneering woman in the judicial world, Jane Bolin. She was the first black woman to graduate from Yale Law School, the first to join the New York City Bar Association, and the first to serve as a judge in the United States when she was sworn into the bench of the New York City Domestic Relations Court in 1939. Jane dedicated much of her career to advocate for children's rights and education, regardless of racial background. After a life of groundbreaking achievements and service, Jane Bolin died at the age of 98. The rain has let up as we find the grave of Sterling Morrison. He was a founding member and guitarist of the legendary rock group The Velvet Underground. The band formed in 1964, and Morrison would release 4 studio albums with the band. Today they are regarded as one of the most influential rock bands in history and would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1996. Sterling was just 53 when he died from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Before saying goodbye to Poughkeepsie Cemetery, let's remember a few stars who were cremated here but don't have a grave. Rip Torn is remembered by TV audiences for playing Arthur on The Larry Sanders Show in the 90s, and later playing Don Geiss on 30 Rock. On film, he was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for playing Marsh Turner in Cross Creek. You also saw Rip as Zed in the Men in Black films.
Let's put it on.
Put what on?
The last suit you'll ever wear.
Rip was reportedly cremated here after his death in 2019 at age 88. The whereabouts of his ashes, currently unknown. Margaret Hamilton achieved movie immortality with her iconic role as the Wicked Witch of the West in 1939's The Wizard of Oz.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
Years later, she would appear in William Castle's 13 Ghosts and also dedicated much of her life to children's education. Margaret died at the age of 82, and after her cremation here, her ashes were scattered over her property in Amenia, New York. This is the mausoleum at Cedar Hill Cemetery in Newburgh. Herein we find the crypt of Eric Carr. He was a drummer, best remembered as the drummer for the rock band Kiss from 1980 until his death in 1991. Eric would take over on drums from founding member Peter Criss. For his makeup, he took on the persona of the Fox. His first album with Kiss was Music from the Elder, and he'd go on to perform on numerous album releases, including Creatures of the Night. In 1991, Carr was diagnosed with heart cancer. He underwent multiple surgeries, but his health never recovered. During treatment, he flew to Los Angeles to film one last music video with the band for God Gave Rock and Roll to You Too. It was one of his last appearances with the band. Months later, he died at the age of 41. Traveling through small towns, it's always fun to stop into the local rural cemeteries, like Crum Elbow Cemetery. Here we find a noted photojournalist named W. Eugene Smith. He was known as the master of the photo essay and one of the most important American photographers, particularly of the World War II and post-war eras. He was once quoted as saying, "A photo is a small voice, but sometimes one photograph or a group of them can lure our senses into awareness." He brought awareness to the events of World War II, the clinic of Albert Schweitzer, pollution which damaged the health of residents of Minamata, Japan, and more. His 1948 series Country Doctor, photographed for Life magazine, is considered the first extended editorial photo story. He died after suffering a stroke at age 59. His epitaph reads, "Let truth be the prejudice." This is Woodlawn Cemetery, not the famous one in the Bronx. This Woodlawn is in New Windsor. Here we find the grave of Cinda Berenson Abbott. She was known as the mother of women's basketball. In the late 1800s, she was teaching gymnastics and physical education at Smith College in Massachusetts. She was looking for more fun activities to offer as physical education and learned of a new game recently invented by a man named James Naismith: basketball. She decided to take the game to her pupils at Smith College. The first games of women's basketball were played in 1892. The game was an instant hit and grew in popularity in the coming years. It was notable for not only improving physical health, but also encouraging teamwork and cooperation. Cinda would write the first rule book for women's basketball in 1899, modifying some of the men's rules. She would be in the inaugural class of inductees in the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame in 1999. Our third president of the day can be found in Kinderhook Church Cemetery. Here lies Martin Van Buren. He was the 8th president of the United States, serving from 1837 to 1841. Just months after his inauguration, a financial panic hit, leading to a depression that would mar his presidency, and he would not be re-elected for a second term. Van Buren was anti-slavery and blocked the admission of Texas to the Union as a slave state. After his presidency, in the years leading up to the Civil War, he'd be an elder statesman in the Union's efforts to abolish slavery. He died of bronchial asthma and heart failure at the age of 79. Next up on our journey, we arrive at Oak Hill Cemetery in Nyack. In these grounds is an actress known as the First Lady of American Theater, Helen Hayes. Born in 1900, the beloved actress had a career that spanned some 8 decades. Over that time, she'd be the first person to win the Triple Crown of acting, an Emmy, Oscar, and Tony, and she'd be the first woman to win the EGOT, which adds a Grammy to the list. Her Oscars were for the films Airport and The Sin of Madelon Claudet.
You're English, aren't you? I knew it the moment you started to talk. You make our language sound so delightful. My late husband used to say...
Never mind what he said. What about your ticket?
Other notable films include Anastasia and Herbie Rides Again. On stage, her Tony Awards were for the plays Happy Birthday and Time Remembered. On top of all this, she'd be honored with a Presidential Medal of Freedom and be inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Her philanthropic efforts include the creation of the Helen Hayes Hospital, helping rehabilitate people with disabilities. Helen lived to be 92, passing away from heart failure. Now, an award is named after her, the Helen Hayes Award, recognizing excellence in professional theater. Resting next to Helen is her son James, also an actor. You fans of Hawaii Five-0 remember him as Danny Williams in some 259 episodes of the 60s and 70s series. He made appearances on other shows like The Love Boat and Fantasy Island. James can also be seen in Disney films like Swiss Family Robinson and the Clint Eastwood film Hang 'em High. His success as a spoken word recording artist is alluded to right here on his stone. James lived to be 72. Also in this family plot is Helen's husband, Charles MacArthur, a noted playwright and screenwriter. He was nominated for 3 Oscars for Best Writing for Rasputin and the Empress, Wuthering Heights, and winning for the 1935 film The Scoundrel. Other notable scripts include His Girl Friday, and his successful plays include Ladies and Gentlemen, 20th Century, and The Front Page. Charles MacArthur lived to be 60. Charles was good friends with our next notable figure, who happens to rest nearby. This is the grave of Ben Hecht. They were not only friends, but frequent collaborators in their writing. Ben was nominated for 6 Oscars for Notorious, Angels Over Broadway, Wuthering Heights, Viva Villa, and winning for Underworld, the first ever for writing, and The Scoundrel, which he shared with Charles. In this era, Ben Hecht was the Hollywood screenwriter. He personified Hollywood itself. For the stage, Ben co-wrote The Front Page with Charles, becoming a widely acclaimed play and film. He died at age 70, and in 1983 was inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame. Another noted writer can be found here at Oak Hill, Carson McCullers. She was a novelist, playwright, and poet, perhaps best known for her first novel, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. It would be made into a 1968 film starring Alan Arkin. Another novel, Reflections in a Golden Eye, was made into a film starring Elizabeth Taylor and Marlon Brando. Her novel, The Member of the Wedding, would be made into a successful Broadway play in 1950. Carson was just 50 when she died from a brain hemorrhage. Our last Oak Hill stop is an artist named Edward Hopper. He was one of America's most acclaimed artists of the 20th century, known for melancholy paintings of lonely people in the big city. He was a master at using light and color to evoke certain moods. Among his most recognized works is Nighthawks. Hopper died from natural causes at age 84. Let's make our way now to Grace Episcopal Church to pay tribute to a hero named Wells Crowther. He was an equities trader and volunteer firefighter in New York. On September 11, 2001, Wells was in the South Tower when the plane struck the tower. He survived. Finding a group of other survivors, he helped guide them downstairs, including carrying an injured woman on his back. Afterwards, he went back upstairs to assist others. He wrapped a red bandana around his mouth to protect him from smoke and haze, and came to be known as the Man in the Red Bandana. He continued to lead people to safety and go back up for more, until the tower collapsed. It's estimated that he saved as many as 18 lives, but lost his own at the age of 24. His body was found in March 2002 alongside several other firefighters. We've arrived now at Nanuet and St. Anthony's Catholic Cemetery. In these grounds is the Sultan of Salsa, Tito Puente. He was a musician, songwriter, and band leader known in the mambo and Latin jazz genres. He's remembered for playing the timbales, the kind of drum you see here on his stone. In 1948, he formed a band that would come to be known as the Tito Puente Orchestra. They played a major role in the rising popularity of Cuban and Caribbean music like mambo and cha-cha in the 50s, bringing it to the mainstream. He had a hit in the 1958 album Dance Mania, and among his most popular songs is Oye Como Va, which is the music inscribed right into his tombstone. Tito would be awarded the National Medal of Arts and would be inducted into the International Latin Music Hall of Fame. He would also make an appearance as himself on The Simpsons. Tito Puente died after suffering a heart attack at age 77. Here too we find Chita Rivera. The renowned actress, singer, and dancer won 2 Tony Awards for Best Leading Actress for The Rink and Kiss of the Spider Woman, among 8 additional Tony nominations and a Lifetime Achievement Award. Other notable productions include Bye Bye Birdie, Chicago, and West Side Story as Anita, the role which made her a Broadway star. She would also appear in the 2002 film adaptation of Chicago and often performed on television. Chito would be the first Latina to receive a Kennedy Center honor and the first awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She lived to be 91. This is the Middle Patent Rural Cemetery in Banksville. Here is where E.G. Marshall is laid to rest. The actor had a distinguished career on Broadway and would be among the first class of the famed Actors Studio. For his work on television, Marshall would win 2 Emmys for his role as Lawrence Preston on The Defenders. On film, he's remembered for playing the unflappable Juror No. 4 in the courtroom drama 12 Angry Men, and playing the President of the United States in Superman 2. Marshall died from lung cancer at age 84. Moving on to Bedford, New York, we visit St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. Here lies Joshua Logan. He was a theater and film director and writer. In 1949, he co-wrote with Oscar Hammerstein the book for the immensely popular musical South Pacific, which he also directed. It would earn him the Pulitzer Prize and a Tony Award. Other successful productions he directed include Annie Get Your Gun and Mr. Roberts. In Hollywood, he'd earned 3 Oscar nominations for Picnic, Sayonara, and Fanny. He also directed hits like Bus Stop. Joshua died from progressive supranuclear palsy at age 79. Also here is the grave of Joseph Mankiewicz, another of classic Hollywood's great filmmakers. He won 4 Oscars for 2 consecutive films, A Letter to 3 Wives and All About Eve, both for Best Director and Best Screenplay. Other notable films include The Barefoot Contessa and one of Hollywood's grandest epics, Cleopatra. Joseph would also produce films including The Philadelphia Story and Woman of the Year. He was the brother of Herman Mankiewicz, who wrote the screenplay for Citizen Kane. Joseph died from a heart attack at age 83. We're back at Kensico Cemetery, where we've found quite a few stars in past videos. Here too is one of the Ringling brothers, Alfred Ringling. Alf was one of 8 Ringling siblings, 5 of whom would work together in the late 1800s to transform their small touring company into one of the largest circuses in the US. Ringling Brothers Circus, later Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. Alf died in 1919 at age 57. Moving on to Rockland Cemetery in Spark Hill, we find the impressive grave of the Pathfinder, John Fremont. He was an explorer who played a crucial role in the westward expansion of America. Fremont famously led several map-making expeditions west in the mid-1800s, surveying parts of the Oregon Trail and California. During one of these expeditions, he's remembered for having planted the American flag on the Rocky Mountains, symbolically claiming the West for the United States. Fremont would also play a role in the conquering of California, which was part of Mexico at that time. He was appointed to the rank of major and led American settlers in the uprising against Mexico. By September 1846, Americans had conquered California, and in January 1847, Fremont accepted Pico's surrender upon the signing of the Treaty of Cahuenga. On September 9, 1850, California was admitted to the Union as a free state, and Fremont became one of its first 2 senators. In the era leading up to and during the Civil War, John Fremont was a powerful advocate for the abolition of slavery. But his legacy is a complicated one due to his involvement in attacks on the mostly peaceful indigenous populations of California, as well as a court-martial for insubordination. John Fremont died at the age of 77 from peritonitis. Moving on to one of the great New York City area cemeteries we've spent a lot of time in the past, we once again visit the magnificent Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. Adding to the list of hundreds of notables interred here is Bat Masterson, a legend of the American Old West. As a frontiersman, he quickly distinguished himself as a buffalo hunter, scout, and professional gambler. He'd later earn fame as a gunfighter and sheriff in Dodge City, during which time he was involved in several notable shootouts. As an icon of the Old West, he'd later be depicted countless times in popular culture, in TV shows, movies, comics, literature, and theater. Later in life, he was a sports writer and celebrity. He lived to be 67, passing away from a heart attack in 1921. Also here in the Bronx is St. Raymond's, where we previously visited legends like Billie Holiday. St. Raymond's is divided by the freeway into the old and new sections. Let's begin in the old cemetery in section 15. Here we find a woman who was known as Typhoid Mary. Real name Mary Mallon. In the early 1900s, she contracted typhoid as an asymptomatic carrier. She worked as a cook and is believed to have infected somewhere between 50 to more than 100 people, causing multiple deaths. She was forcibly quarantined by authorities on North Brother Island. She was released after promising she would no longer work as a cook. But breaking that promise, she continued to work as a cook, knowing she could be infecting her clients. So she was quarantined a second time for more than 20 years for the remainder of her life. She died from pneumonia at age 69. The aftermath has stirred debates over the ethics of forced quarantine and the need for enhanced medical and legal social treatment of disease carriers. The name Typhoid Mary is now a colloquial term for someone who spreads disease. Let's cross over to the new section now to find another one for you boxing fans. Hector Macho Camacho. The flamboyant southpaw from Puerto Rico was one of the great boxers of his era, competing professionally from 1980 to 2010. He would be a world champion in 3 weight classes: super featherweight, lightweight, and junior welterweight. He's also remembered for his bout against Sugar Ray Leonard, in which he scored a 5th-round technical knockout. In November 2012, Camacho was shot while sitting in his car in Puerto Rico. He died days later at the age of 50. His body lay in state at the Puerto Rico Department of Sports and Recreation for 2 days, allowing hundreds to pay tribute, after which his body was interred here. There's an old riddle that goes, who's buried in Grant's tomb? It may come as no surprise to you that the answer is Ulysses S. Grant is buried in Grant's tomb. Unless you deal in semantics, in which case you might respond, technically no one is buried in Grant's tomb, they are entombed. In any case, the magnificent tomb of General Grant is located here in Manhattan along the shores of the Hudson River. Its design was inspired by Napoleon's tomb at Les Invalides in Paris, a fitting monument to the man who led the Union Army to defeat the Confederate Army during the Civil War and kept our nation together. Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant on April 9, 1865. The victorious general, the military savior of the nation, cast a shadow nearly as large as Lincoln himself. After the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant was elected 18th President of the United States. He worked to implement congressional reconstruction and to remove the vestiges of slavery, protecting African Americans during this transitional period. He would even appoint African Americans and Jewish Americans to prominent federal offices. Grant died in 1885 at age 63. An estimated 1.5 million people attended his New York funeral. His body was laid to rest in Riverside Park in a temporary crypt while this tomb was being completed. He was laid to rest here on April 17, 1897, in what is the largest individual mausoleum in North America. Back to another one of my favorite New York cemeteries, Greenwood Cemetery. In a previous video, we visited legendary conductor Leonard Bernstein. Let's take a moment today to remember his wife, Felicia Montealegre. She was an actress whose career began on the New York stage, including Shakespearean roles, and in plays like The Little Foxes, and in Les Troyens at the Metropolitan Opera. She'd take her talents to the small screen in the 40s and 50s, making appearances in teleplays on shows like Kraft Theater and Studio One. Felicia would work alongside her husband, too, in dramatic works with orchestra like Joan of Arc at the Stake. She died from breast cancer at age 56. Felicia is portrayed by Carey Mulligan in the 2023 film Maestro. How about breakfast at Tiffany's? Tiffany's grave, that is. Also here at Greenwood is the Tiffany family. First up is Louis Comfort Tiffany. He was an artist and designer known for his work in stained glass, associated with the Art Nouveau movement. He created his glass-making firm in 1885. They became known for making stained glass windows and lamps known as Tiffany lamps. He would be the first design director at his family company, Tiffany & Co., which was founded by his father, Charles Louis Tiffany, also interred here. The namesake of Tiffany's, Charles Tiffany founded what would become Tiffany & Co. in 1837, specializing in jewelry. It gained a reputation for selling the finest goods, particularly one-of-a-kind jewelry. Tiffany's created the first retail catalog in the country in 1854. Charles died in 1902 at age 90. Another piece of New York history can be found here at the grave of Bill the Butcher Poole. He was an organized crime figure, one of the most prominent of 19th century New York. He earned the nickname Bill the Butcher for being one of the toughest street fighters, using knives or bare fists. He would lead the street gang known as the Bowery Boys. Poole met his end after being shot by associates of a rival in 1855 at the age of 33. Daniel Day-Lewis would play a fictionalized Bill the Butcher in Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York. Moving on to our next New York cemetery, we arrive at Union Field in Queens. Here we find the grave of actor Robert Lansing. He had several notable roles on television, including as Detective Corella on 87th Precinct, Frank Savage on 12 O'Clock High, Control on The Equalizer, and Paul on Kung Fu: The Legend Continues. He also made guest appearances on shows like The Twilight Zone, on the memorable episode The Long Morrow. He can also be seen in films like 4D Man. Robert died from lung cancer at age 66. Next door to Union Field is the Evergreens Cemetery. Let's take a moment here to remember the victims of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. On March 25, 1911, fire broke out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Garment Factory in New York City. The fire led to the deaths of 146 workers, all women and girls. Because the doors of the stairwells and exits were locked, a common practice at the time to prevent unauthorized breaks, workers couldn't get out, and many tried to escape the flames by jumping to their deaths. It was one of the deadliest industrial disasters in U.S. history and led to improved safety standards for workers and fire codes. Several of the victims could not be identified and are laid to rest here under this monument. Wellwood Cemetery is in West Babylon. Here we find the grave of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They were an American married couple who were convicted of spying for the Soviet Union during the Cold War, including providing top-secret information about American radar, sonar, jet propulsion engines, and nuclear weapons designs. Convicted of espionage in 1951, they were executed by the federal government of the United States in 1953 at Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York, becoming the first American civilians to be executed for such charges and the first to be executed during peacetime. They were both in their 30s. For our fifth U.S. president of the day, we land at Young's Memorial Cemetery in Oyster Bay. This is where Theodore Roosevelt is laid to rest. With the assassination of President William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, not yet 43, became the 26th and youngest president in the nation's history from 1901 to 1909. He brought a new excitement and power to the office, vigorously leading Congress and the American public toward progressive reforms and strong foreign policy. While in office, he championed his Square Deal, focusing on conservation of natural resources, corporate law, and consumer protection. He'd be the first American to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906 for his efforts to end the Russo-Japanese War. Teddy Roosevelt generally ranks among the nation's greatest presidents and is immortalized alongside George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln on Mount Rushmore. He died in his sleep at age 60. Moving further into Long Island, we reach Locust Valley. Here we find another one for you boxing aficionados, Rocky Graziano. He's considered among the greatest knockout artists in the history of the sport, ranking number 23 on the Ring magazine's list of greatest punchers. He held the title of World Middleweight Boxing Champion from 1947 to 1948. He would be inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame and have his story told on screen, played by Paul Newman in the 1956 film Somebody Up There Likes Me. Rocky died from cardiopulmonary failure at age 71. Also here is Ray Goulding. The actor and comedian was half of comedy duo Bob and Ray. Their radio show, The Bob and Ray Show, which ran from 1946 into the 80s, would be inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame. They would also take their talents to early television with Bob and Ray in 1951. They'd go on to make numerous appearances on variety shows like The Ed Sullivan Show and The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Ray died from kidney failure at age 68. Our next Locust Valley stop is the grave of Whitey Ford, nicknamed the Chairman of the Board. He was a professional baseball player, a pitcher, who played his entire 16 years in the MLB with the New York Yankees. He was a 10-time All-Star and 6-time World Series champion, and in 1974 would be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. He set numerous pitching records throughout his career and remains one of the Yankees' all-time greats. He lived to be 91. One more here at Locust Valley, Ilka Chase. She was an actress appearing in more than 40 productions from the 20s into the 70s. She played Lisa in Now Voyager, Grace in the Animal Kingdom, and Mrs. Restes in Ocean's 11. She also made appearances on shows like The Patty Duke Show. Ilka would also be a writer. Her novel In Bed We Cry was adapted for the stage with her in the leading role. She lived to be 72. If you're a fan of cartoons, you'll get a kick out of this next one. Here at Central Cemetery is the distinctive grave of Jay Kennedy, which features some of the most iconic cartoon characters in history. Jay was an editor and writer. He joined King Features Syndicate in 1988 as deputy comics editor, becoming editor after just 1 year. Then in 1997, he became editor-in-chief. He also wrote articles about the history of cartooning and profiled various cartoonists. Jay was the author of the unofficial Underground and New Wave Comics Price Guide. He died tragically while on vacation in Costa Rica at age 50. He drowned after being caught in a riptide. St. Charles Cemetery is in Farmingdale. Here lies Vincent Gardenia. The Italian actor was nominated twice for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, for the films Bang the Drums Slowly and for Moonstruck, playing Cher's father. Other films include Death Wish and Little Shop of Horrors. For his television work, he'd win an Emmy for Age Old Friends, and on stage he won the Tony for The Prisoner of 2nd Avenue. Vincent died from a heart attack at age 72. And finally, our journey through New York lands us at Pine Lawn Cemetery in East Farmingdale. Here is the grave of John Coltrane. He was a jazz saxophonist, band leader, and composer, considered one of the most important figures in the history of jazz and 20th century music. He released 25 albums as a band leader during his lifetime, including A Love Supreme, released in 1964, which ranks among the greatest albums of all time. John Coltrane died tragically young of liver cancer at the age of 40. His popularity has only grown since, and he's received numerous posthumous honors, including a Grammy and Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, a special Pulitzer Prize, induction into numerous halls of fame, and was even canonized by the African Orthodox Church. Resting with John is his wife Alice, also a talented jazz musician, an accomplished jazz pianist, organist, harpist, and singer. She would release more than 20 albums and frequently collaborated with her husband as well. Alice died from respiratory failure at age 69. And that concludes our tour. What are some of your favorite memories of the stars we visited today? Share them in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more famous grave tours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.